Okay, today we're going to be looking at 1914 by Wilfred Owen, and we've already done the kind of general story idea of the poem so that we can understand a little bit better how to memorize it and why it makes sense. So now we're going to break it down little by little and get to all that nitpicky stuff that I know you love. Okay? All right. War broke. War broke. Double meaning. What do we got? How is that times 2?
And broke a people.
Okay, so we've got a literal and a figurative meaning. Good. War broke. War started. War began. But it also broke people and lands, spirits, individuals, collectives, all of those big ideas that we've already talked about that should already be on your list. Okay? War broke. Yes, it did. Then we have a colon. What generally follows a colon?
An explanation.
An explanation. So what he's doing is he's giving us a very short, actually complete sentence. Subject, verb, war broke. What follows, if you get a structure question, this is a brilliant thing to talk about. Okay? Because this would address anything regarding structure. War broke. Complete sentence, subject, verb. The rest of this stanza, the rest of this octave explains how it happened and why. Okay? And now, the winter of the world with perishing great darkness closes in. Okay, we've already talked about the fact that winter of the world is a metaphor. Okay? Metaphor for death itself. Okay? As we know that winter... darkness, yes, and that's important to talk about because look, there's that word. So we take winter, lacking in that blooming in spring and summer blazing her glory, we get the darkness instead. We usually consider winter as a sort of gray period where we may not necessarily see the sun as often. Okay, so once again, you could talk about literal and figurative darkness. What else does darkness symbolize?
A lack of new life.
Lack of new life, possibly fear. What do I mean if I say, oh, poor guy, he's really in the dark on that one?
Doesn't understand.
Bingo. Knowledge. Lack of light, lack of knowledge, lack of hope. Does that fit the poem?
Yeah.
Yeah. And now the winter of the world with perishing great darkness closes in. We also looked at world, okay? And the idea of world here and overall the width of Europe. We talked yesterday a little bit about the idea that this points to scale. War broke. And then what happened to the scale?
Well, then it goes on to Berlin, and then to Europe.
And then to Europe, and then to the world. Okay? So once again, you can point to the idea that regardless of where you were, even if your country did not participate directly in World War I, how might you have been affected? People that study history, tell me.
The economy.
Bingo. Okay? When war happens, and we can talk about this even today, are there not worldwide socioeconomic consequences? Somebody literally pays, right? So we can talk about scale and its effects on everyone, okay? Now, we look at this line, with perishing great darkness. Great. You could talk about that as an ironic word, couldn't you? Because normally, here's your sentence. Make a sentence with the word great in connotation. Somebody, go.
I had a great day.
What does that mean?
Means you had a fun time. It's a positive thing.
Normally, we associate the word great with something positive, or at least large in a good way.
Well, it could be pointing out like how everyone saw it as something, it's like a great thing that you should honor, but he's like discussing how it shouldn't be viewed that way.
Good. Here, though, if you looked at it too, in an ironic fashion, okay, with perishing great darkness. What does that do for the darkness?
It
Makes it bigger.
Yes, it makes it bigger. What happens to the fear? It increases, okay? We also might, what did the Brits call World War I?
The Great War.
The Great War, okay? Not because it was, yay, I had a cool day, but because it was so vast in scale. The Great War. We refer to it here in America as World War I. But where Owen was from, the British referred to it, and still do, even today, refer to it as the Great War. With perishing. He tells you straight from the get-go, what's going to happen?
People are gonna die.
Death will follow. Winter, darkness, perish. There's a step-by-step process there, okay? We talked yesterday or whenever a little bit about the idea of that closing in. It closes in.
It's very ominous with the great.
Good.
He's also playing with scale a lot.
Yes, how?
It goes from small to big to small to big frequently.
Yes. Because if that darkness is so large, but it starts to close in, that's really scary, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah. Okay? That's what I want you to feel. I want you to think about that. What if you were living in Paris? What if you were living in Belgium? What if you were living here? Okay? And all those refugees came. All right? So, what's happening with that largeness?
It's coming together.
It's coming together, but at the same time, that means that it's also growing. It's an interesting play with perspective. Moving on. The foul tornado. We have yet again what other device here?
Metaphor?
We have a metaphor.
Pathetic fallacy.
We also have a pathetic fallacy. We'll talk about that as well. Did I write that down somewhere? Is that on there? Is pathetic fallacy there, or did you come up with that? Somewhere.
I read it on
Oh, it might have been in Judy's notes. I think you're right. Yes. Okay. So I ran out of room, clearly, but good that you noted that. The foul tornado. Yesterday we talked about why tornado was an appropriate metaphor. Do we need to go back over that again? Why tornado works and not hurricane?
We didn't talk about that.
Okay, why a tornado?
You said that like there's nothing, people can't do anything, just die.
Good. We can't do anything about it? Keep going. Why? Why is tornado?
Widespread. It's kind of uncontrollable.
It's
You can't
uncontrollable?
really you can't predict it.
Good. It's unpredictable, unexpected. And what does it bring with?
Destruction.
Absolute destruction. Okay? And
So why would a hurricane work?
Because you can predict where hurricanes are going to come.
well, and here's the thing. You got to think geography. Okay?
Hurricane needs water.
You got to think about geography as well. So the foul tornado, hurricane. Yeah, tornado's better, even though it has the same syllables. Plus, what do tornadoes look like?
A funnel of darkness.
Funnel of darkness. That is why it's better than a hurricane. Okay? It also, somebody mentioned yesterday, has an eye, kind of like a hurricane, right? In the very center of it. And he's calling it foul. We need to look at that word, foul. What is implied with the word foul?
Grotesque.
Okay, something perhaps like evil, something that, if something's foul,
It's like diseased.
like diseased. Foul is fair and fair is foul, from Macbeth. Okay? So we think about that. It is infectious, so it's an infectious metaphor, which continues. Okay? The idea of disease, all right? And where is it centered? At Berlin. We talked about this being an accusatory tone yesterday. This is Owen placing blame where he believes it should go. Go.
If you look at the eye idea, the eye of a tornado is incredibly small, so it kind of gives the idea that Berlin is the only place that's still good. Well, not good, but they survive. Well, I don't know how to put it.
Oh yeah,
Well,
like
it's
they're
like the
causing
eye.
all this destruction.
But they're benefiting
preserving
from it. So
themselves.
that kind
Good.
of makes
yeah,
them
preserving
below.
themselves, but yes, causing lots of destruction. Dang it, somebody erased the board. People who study history. Yesterday, it was Rachita who asked this, and I said, oh, that's interesting. There was, the way the Germans campaigned was in the form of a circle. Schlegenplan or
The
something.
Schlieffen.
The Schlieffenplan.
That's it! Schlieffenplan, okay? Schlieffenplan.
Man.
So if you know the history, could you add a sentence in that tornado is appropriate metaphor because of their actual military tactics?
Oh, okay, that's what
Which,
you mean.
which in essence, what did they want to do? They wanted to surround, much like
A tornado.
a tornado. Go, Remy.
I was just asking, so if we're going off that, the foul disease, could we kind of talk about the Spanish plague that killed just as many, or close to the same amount of people as World War I actually did? So it's this kind of death that's like all over Europe.
If you did, that would be all you needed to say.
Okay.
Don't stray too far outside what is there, okay? Because every time you need to be making sure that you're addressing the question. If you simply wanted to draw a parallel, okay, but be done with it quickly, all right? You're not really trying to impress about your historical knowledge unless you can make a direct connection with the poem, okay? Centered at Berlin. Centered at Berlin. The idea too, we've already talked about the idea of closing in, centered at Berlin. It's coming. It starts here, but inevitably it's coming. And there's nothing we can do to stop it because it is, yes. Okay? The foul tornado centered at Berlin is over all the width of Europe's world. Okay, so a couple of things going on here. We talked yesterday about over all the width of Europe, pointing to, big idea, scale. Okay, scale. Now, let's listen. War broke, and now the winter of the world with perishing great darkness closes in. The foul tornado centered at Berlin is over all the width of Europe whirled. The alliteration of the W in the first 4 lines, repeated over and over again, sounds like the wind. Okay? It's that whirling that we actually hear. So there you have a sound device that shapes meaning. That's the key, folks. Don't just say there's alliteration. Okay? Remember that when you talk about a particular device, you have to give it a purpose. Here, the purpose of it is to sound like that tornado. And notice that because it covers 4 lines, it's almost like a whirring, like you would hear in a tornado. Okay?
Also, it like rises and falls, kind of like.
Good. Rises and falls. Yes, nice.
How would you describe that fully? Because then there's the furled, and it sounds like a row, but it's not
Ah,
necessarily a double.
okay. In that case, if you looked at, whirled and furled, you could talk about the rhyme here, okay?
And that helps that.
This would be, what do we call that? Furled.
Folded.
Assonance. Whirled, this part, earled, okay? Because that sound, that assonance thing that's going on there, that works. Did I answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay. So here's the thing. Sentence, very short, long. War broke. Then we get a longer thing. Then we get a sentence that's 3 lines long. Okay? The foul tornado, that's our subject. He gives us centered at Berlin. is overall the width of your world. What's it doing? Rending the sails of progress. We have yet another what device? What did we talk about yesterday? Sails of progress.
Metaphor.
We have another metaphor. Okay? Then what would you have to do with the metaphor of sails? What do you need to talk about?
Progress is like sail or
Oh, without wind, they
Yeah.
move forward.
Good. Without wind, the sail cannot move forward. What else? What else did we say? If the sails are rent. Go ahead, Catherine.
Then they're ripped and you can't move forward and you're stagnant.
Good. Stagnant. Good. And if you're stagnant and you can't move and something's coming at you, you are helpless. Okay?
It's kind of like being stuck between a rock and a hard place. You
Yes.
can't do anything to benefit yourself.
Yes. And that right there, we talked about progress. Progress in what sense? Culturally, intellectually, okay?
Well, like literally during this time, the Germans would bomb the trading ships, so they like, literally broke their ships.
Good.
So it hindered the economic progress as well.
Excellent. Okay, did y'all hear that? The idea of bombing the ships so that they literally could not progress and thus economically their enemy suffered. Okay? So, rending the sails of progress. I also wrote the word scope here because when we think about progression, this is not an individual thing, is it? Here, if you talked about intellectual or cultural progress, that's not just one person. You're talking about what here?
Collective.
The collective. Okay? The collective is unable to make any progress. That's a fabulous metaphor. So you've got, how many metaphors have we talked about already? 3, 4? Winter of the world, foul tornado. Well, great darkness closing in. That's 1, 2. Rending the sails of progress. There's another. Now, Harriet, you mentioned pathetic fallacy. First of all, what is a pathetic fallacy?
It's like personification for nature.
Yes, this is when we give nature human characteristics. So very specifically, pathetic fallacy has to do with the personification of nature. What do you see here since you mentioned it?
I saw it with the tornado.
Okay, can you give me a sentence?
Um,
Either you or someone, help her out here.
It's like foul tornado. You usually don't associate those like that type of word with.
Can you make the connection here?
The sails?
Okay.
It almost makes the tornado sound, I guess,
Yeah.
Well, it's like the
evil.
tornado's the one that's destroying it.
Yes.
Like it has
Saying-
hands and it's
Yeah.
Good, like it has hands and it's literally ripping. Okay? Good. Because while tornadoes do create vast destruction, they usually destroy physical things. But here, metaphorically, he's not necessarily talking about physicality, is he? What's he talking about? Progress. Metaphorically. So, that, good. Glad you brought that up, the whole pathetic fallacy. Then we get rent or furled. We talked a little bit about this yesterday. He uses that same verb, rending, rent, and we talked yesterday also about what furled means.
Why? Is there significance in the fact that he said both of those and that there's an or? I feel like that's a strange thing to write. Like I don't really know how to put it into words, but you never really see like a poet saying it could like this or that.
Okay, let's address that question. So, if we continue the sailing metaphor, all right, maybe we as a nation are attempting to continue to sail forward. But what's happening to our sails? They are being rent. Okay? Now,
Oh, so you just fold them up so they won't be destroyed? Okay.
if we're a nation and we're trying to protect ourselves and we furl our flags or our sails. Why would we do that?
Self-preservation.
Self-preservation. But either way, this is where the catch-22, damned if you do, damned if you don't.
So it's just addressing that kind of weird dynamic between going forward and preserving what you can.
Yes.
Okay.
And I like the idea of dynamic. Okay? Yes. It seems, could we use dichotomy? Okay? Could you use catch-22? Yes. Whether we unfurl or furl, either way, we're not making progress. Thus, all arts ensigns are either this or this. Because art, essentially, as we talked about yesterday, art essentially is what this means. Why are you smiling?
Miss Rowan says, Miss Crusher says we're ready. I don't know what that means.
Oh! How much time do we have?
Half an hour.
Okay, tell her another 20 minutes or so will come
Okay.
like the last few.
Okay.
Okay?
Sorry.
Awesome. So, sentence structure.
I feel like I know what's going on.
Yes, of course, you'll be reciting. Rent or furled or all arts ensigns. Look at the next sentence.
Verse whales.
What, go.
The alliteration there.
Oh, are all arts ensigns. It's not just alliteration, you could also call it,
Consonants.
no, that's the other. Assonance, okay? All arts ensigns. What happens to the words? What do you have to do? Do I say all arts ensigns?
No, it's
No,
not.
so
What do I do?
All.
The assonance, okay, of the letter A. When you say assonance, say what is assonated. I don't know if that's a word, but I'm just telling you right now. What you want to do is say the assonance of the A causes the reader to slow down. So what? What's the point of when we slow down? Give me a big idea. All
To reflect.
arts
It's
ensigns.
just like they have to slow down.
It sounds like a pitying thing.
Okay.
Slowing down and like lamenting.
Okay, there's a lamentation there. Could all, not some.
Mixed.
Scale, thank you very much. Very good. So the assonance also, not only with the word all, helps to increase the scale. When we slow down, we're stopping to think about not just a few. It's not just architecture. It's not just art. It's not just music. It's philosophy and thought. Verse whales. Complete sentence. Subject, verb, 2 words. You have got to address sentence structure. What can you say about what's happening here, 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 and then this? What's happening with the sentence structure?
It's fluctuating.
It's fluctuating. Good. So we look at verse whales. Very short. Fluctuating sentence structure. Good. So what, Dale? What's the purpose of it? What does it help reinforce? That's what you want to ask yourself.
Scale.
How?
Oh,
I don't see how. You have to tell me.
like the
She says
individual
it
collect.
followed- Well, it's as Alex said before, it's like he's going from the large scale to the
He's
small
literally, it's
scale.
fluctuating a lot.
Okay.
The longer sentences is getting bigger and the shorter ones.
But it just shows how the war, like even though it engulfed all of Europe, it's still like closing on each like individual.
Okay.
It's chaotic too.
It seems what?
Chaotic.
Chaotic. How does that help us?
It would kind of mimic the movement of the tornado.
Bingo. Okay? Good. Very good. We don't know where it's going next. All that, verse whales. Here, if you talked about the idea that it's closing in, here he's a poet, folks. It's closing in on poetry. Verse whales.
Oh,
Now-
is that whales like crying?
Yes, that's the next subject. What does to wail mean? What does it sound like to cry?
It's usually soft, but to wail is like almost
loud
like a crying,
sobbing.
screaming,
Throaty and
Good.
Really powerful.
Yes. There's a big difference, and this is where you would write. You would say there's a difference between crying and wailing. Wailing is when you're feeling what?
Distraught.
Like distress.
Yeah, anger and
Basically
sadness at the same
destroyed.
time.
Okay?
Deeper feeling.
It is a deeper
Yeah.
feeling. There might be fear, pain.
Could you say that most of the time when people wail, or people usually wail when someone dies, like when someone close to them dies, so the poet's like lamenting the death or
Good.
ceasing of moving forward in poetry.
Good. Yes.
Or writing.
Yes. Okay? Verse wails. Now here we got to look at it this way. You got two things you can talk about here. That verse, as in the poems are wailing because they're not being written. Because the progress of intellect and thought is being stopped. But at the same time, that verse that is being written, what's it doing?
It's wailing against the war.
Good. It's wailing against the war. Give me something else. Voice. Think about voice.
It's voicing all the other poems that aren't being written.
Good. It's voicing the lamentations of the other poems that are not being written. Good. Give me another one.
It wails of the death of the heart of the war.
Yes. Because those people, if they're dead, can they voice anything else anymore?
It connects to Drummer Hodge. actually.
Good. It does connect to Drummer Hodge.
Yeah.
Very nice.
Like it's almost identical.
So here we're looking at giving voice to people who don't have it anymore. And look how short that sentence is. Okay? And you just came up with 5 or 6 different sentences about 2-word sentence. What number are we looking at right now? 7. Now begin famines of thought and feeling. We talked yesterday about famine. Okay? Famine happens where? Here?
No, everywhere.
across the-
everywhere.
Okay?
Third world
How big is
developing.
famine?
Widespread.
Famine is widespread. This does speak to scale. And he's not talking about literal famine here, although we do know that is a consequence of war. He's talking about what kind of famine?
Culture famine.
Of cultural and fear.
Point to the text. Yes, of thought and feeling. Now, if we are, okay, famine means we don't have what we need, right? Famine means lack of sustenance. Let's take it one word at a time. If we lack thought,
It's like they're mentally starved.
okay, we are mentally starved. Keep going. Give me another sentence.
It's
Maybe-
been taken away from them.
If you lack thought, then you lack ration and reason.
Good.
Makes you more of like a wild animal.
Good.
Could you bring up the greater powers and how they've almost numbed the soldiers to being numb, to not having thoughts and feelings towards war and fighting other soldiers and killing?
Like society is so
Machines.
consumed by war that there's not really room for anything.
Good,
It's like
good.
a distraction.
Well,
Could have given us
that's
the old lie.
well, that society has been starved, and now that they're gonna follow war because that's the only thing that they know.
Good. And Dale, you just mentioned,
Machines.
what
Takes
do we
the-
become if we lack rational thought?
It's like dehumanizing.
It is dehumanizing. And the same could be said for feeling. Folks, juxtapose this against the man he killed, and you have a brilliant essay. Brilliant. Because he is not lacking thought or feeling. He is full of it, isn't he? And what has it done to him?
Taken away.
Take the man he killed. Who is he?
Empty.
Okay, it could be the person he shot, but could also be him. All right? And that's what war has done. Effects of war. Okay? I know. Isn't that cool? All right? Love's wines thin. Okay, this is the hardest sentence in the poem.
Amen.
Okay, I know. It's really tough, and I'm going to give you one basic thing that everybody can get. And then I'll take you deeper, and if you don't want to listen, you don't have to. Okay? Because if you get this and just this one thing, you'll be fine. You'll be in the, 5 range. But if you take it to levels 2 and 3, you're going to be in the 8, 9 range. beyond the IB scale. Okay? All right. Loves wines thin. First of all, we got to stop and we got to think about, okay, what's the subject of our sentence?
There's two possessive.
Yes, and when there's two possessives, we're like, whoa, what's going on? Okay? So we look at this and we say, okay, love has some wine, but that wine is thin. And this is actually, this is a possessive. This is not a possessive. It's wine is.
Oh.
So it's love has some wine, but it is thin. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay? All right. So, loves wines thin. Do we like thin wine?
No.
What kind of wine do we like? Rich, full of body, okay? Not watered down, okay? So, loves wines thin. We know that we don't like that.
But in war, they did not have the substance to create
Okay,
plentiful wine.
that you could talk about. So, let's look at over here. Loves wines thin. The wine of love is thin because we are not loving our neighbor. Love thy neighbor. Loves, this is another metaphor, yes? Okay? Loves wines thin. We are not loving our neighbor. Where does that directive come from?
Bible.
The Bible. Love thy neighbor.
Biblical.
Okay? Hold on.
You love thy neighbor.
Because the wine of love is thin. What's happening here? If there are famines of thought and feeling, we can't produce wine.
Okay.
Okay? Famine. All right? So the crops, I think this is kind of where you were going. Somebody was? The crops that produce wine are thin. And if we're talking about the wine of love, metaphorically speaking, where is love?
Feeling and emotion.
There is a famine of feeling. Note that love follows directly after the famine of feeling. That is what you need. And this, folks, you could stop right there. Okay? You could stop right there. Now, in essence, here, I've got here dissipates or it thins out. What's happened to love in a situation of war?
It's gone.
It's gone.
Somewhere other than here.
Okay? It's dissipated. It has become thin in war. This is the effect of war on man. Okay? Here I have, this kind of speaks to the sustenance idea because it points back to famine. So we kind of already gone there. Wine or sustenance is thinning. Okay? Because we are in a state of, quote, famine. All right? So the metaphorical wine has been thinned out because of this famine of thought and feeling. You follow me with me so far? Yeah. Okay. All right. Now, this is where it gets a little more complicated. And I need you, before I go any further, to look very closely. Wine is mentioned here, and grain is mentioned here. Wine and bread.
Oh, yeah.
Wine
Body of Jesus
and bread.
Christ.
So, if you are prepared to go there,
Yes.
hear me out. Hear me out. Loves wines thin. This is, I must say, this is going to be very dire, what I'm about to say. Okay? Now, if we stop and we think about what is love? What is love? Come on. What is love?
A feeling.
Who is love?
Jesus.
God.
Jesus.
Okay? Yes.
Jesus.
Yes.
Love.
Oh,
Jesus is love. God is love. So,
That's a song.
if we stop and we think, okay, I'm going to replace the word love with God's wines thin or Christ's wines thin. Hold on here. I know it's very exciting.
I'm just hearing noises.
Step by
from
step.
this part.
Yeah, I know it is.
I can't see
it's
them.
like there's a
I'm just-
peanut gallery,
I don't
right?
know.
Love, wine, sin.
Did you just
Okay,
see Van Gogh?
if God and Christ, look, I have an equation.
Great.
This is me cross-curricularly speaking.
Best
If God and Christ equal love, then the wine represents, in communion, it represents hope because the blood of Christ was shed for you and for many for the forgiveness of sin. Okay? So, if that wine/blood is thin,
There's no hope.
They've lost hope.
what has happened
The for-
to the hope or the forgiveness promised us?
it's wearing.
It is wearing thin.
perishing.
It's perishing.
Destroyed.
It's being destroyed.
So the
This
sins
may
we
be-
commit is too great.
What?
So the sins that mankind has committed now is too great to be forgiven.
The sins of mankind are so great that we have gone beyond salvation. That's why I said this is so dire. I'll get you. I'll formulate your thought in the meantime. Okay? That's why I said this is so dire. And I can connect this to his hanging face, a devil sick of sin. Folks, if we get to a point in which not even God can save us, then we are in dire consequences indeed. If the devil himself is so sick of sin, look at how tremendous that impact is, and ultimately what's being said. If mankind gets to that point, that not even God or Christ or the blood of Christ can reach out and offer you hope or salvation, those are dire times indeed. Yes, what were you going to say?
I was going to say, if you want to take the religious imagery a little bit further with that love's wine, then in the brain. So mankind's in this desperate state where
Shh, guys, come on.
where the
Listen.
forgiveness is kind of coming out and God's turning away a little bit. Could you draw a parallel between this time period and when Jesus was hanging on the cross and he was about to die and God
It
turns
is
away
finished.
his face? Yeah. Would that be too much or?
Well, because you could do the grain of human autumn rots.
Down
He did
hurled.
physically rot because of like.
Right, yeah,
Okay.
the situation,
I
God
think
was like overwhelmed by human sin, so he had to
Turn his face away. I think you could. And honestly, that one sentence would be all you'd need to say. Okay? Again, because we've said so much already. All right? But yes, that would work.
So then now this connects to the blood for seed, and that because they
Yes.
have lost all of their hope, there is no. They say there's blood, but there is nothing for growth.
Okay? Good. And yes, that does connect down to the bottom. Go.
Could it also be that people are losing their religious zeal, like their own belief in God is also running thin?
Talk to me about the effect of war in that context. Give us a sentence.
When people see their loved ones dying and they pray to God and then they see that nothing is happening and it's just more war and more destruction, they lose hope in Him and they stop believing.
Absolutely.
It was at this time
Fabulous.
that the guy said God is dead, right?
Nietzsche.
That's what I was thinking.
God is dead.
Actually, I think
Was that way before?
Nietzsche, wait, it was.
I'd have to look it up and see.
Because it came up and we were talking about it in history.
I'd have to see.
Nietzsche was after this.
Yeah. So
Nietzsche was like 1920.
let's connect because we're gonna have to.
But I was thinking.
I need focus. So we go from wine, the wine representative of Christ's blood, and sacrifice. Sacrifice. People are being sacrificed to the greater cause of war as a machine. The grain of human autumn rots down hurled. Now, I have a lot of stuff written over here, okay? I have here hunger times 2, okay? Hunger times 2. So we are hungering for love and the wine. We are hungering for grain, which makes bread. Because bread and wine are the sustenance of communion. Yes? Okay?
They're also hungering for salvation.
Yes, hungering metaphorically for salvation. See, I have here hunger times 2, something, met, literal food, and metaphorical food. Okay? I'm so glad I saved these notes from last year, although they're really difficult to read. So here we think of, here we go, and figurative hope. Yes. Autumn. Autumn, we've already said, is a time of plenty. Harvest, where we reap what we sow. Folks, what have we sown here?
Death.
Destruction.
Yes. Okay.
We heard and
In
realized it with
fact,
us.
look at the violence associated with what's happened to the metaphor of human autumn. We as humans are no longer growing. We are not being nurtured. Down hurled. That's kind of like, is that this? Oops.
No. It's like
That's not-
tumbling towards the roof.
Correct.
That was
There is
the
a
whoosh you said
force.
before.
Yes. Okay, like the leaves of autumn. They don't go zoom.
It's like something picked up by a tornado and thrown out.
Oh, how lovely to make that connection. Something picked up by a tornado and hurled. Indeed. So look at all the bad things the Germans are doing.
Could you juxtapose that? The autumn leaves and the downhill.
Yes, you could. I think that's very nice. You could look at the visual imagery there. Okay? You could talk about the imagery of the autumn softly fell. Okay? As the leaves are slowly meandering their way to the earth versus the force of a tornado, which would literally down hurl human hope and growth. Scale.
Because it's all of humanity, right?
Correct. Oh, wrong side. Ah! What did I just do? Okay, there it goes.
Can you come in and see it?
There we go.
Come on. See.
I love how that becomes a verb. For after spring had bloomed in early Greece. Now we're back in the past. Remember, see, I wrote that right there. We talked about spring blooming, and y'all can read the notes that are down here as to what was Greece.
It was the first, really established empire civilization.
Correct. And so what has happened to civilization of man as a result of war?
It's down.
It's over. It's done.
Deteriorated.
It's thin. It's been down hurled. Okay? Summer blazed her glory out with Rome. What's the note say?
Roman civilization is seen as the summertime.
Summertime of mankind. What do we associate with summer?
Like it's intense
Freedom.
and
Happy
hot.
But it's also very carefree. Okay? Carefree. We know that the Romans indulged, shall we say, in lots of hedonistic practices, which we need not name now because we're being recorded. Okay? But you think about the idea of the Roman celebrations, the Bacchanalia. Okay? Enough said. Autumn softly fell. We've already talked about this. Autumn softly fell. We get the image of the leaves coming down. But what happens in autumn, we have a harvest. Notice we also have a home. A harvest home.
Why doesn't he name a place for that last age? So he talks about Greece and then Rome, and then it's nameless.
What do you think about that? That's a good question.
It follows the entire humanity from the previous stanza.
Good. Okay? So an entire culture here, an entire culture here. And now, as a result of those two cultures, what were we able to do?
Expand.
Harvest. Take what they gave us and reap what we've sown. Does that answer the question?
Does
Good
it
question.
take you through the scales if you go through country to city to an actual home and then everywhere?
Because
Oh,
here,
that's true.
this slow grand age happened where?
In was slow over time.
Good,
Everywhere, widespread.
okay, good. Note 2 I have here versus the first line. War broke, okay? And now the winter of the world with perishing great darkness closes in. As if that happened quickly. War broke.
Well,
And
that's-
what's happening
but
here?
now, too.
A slow grand age, okay? And this too, because of slow, that O draws out the word, thus we say it a little bit slower. And because we also want that slow grand age to continue. So we slow down, okay? Rich with all increase. Rich in multiple ways, which I need not necessarily explain. You've got a literal and a figurative meaning there of rich with all increase. Again, pointing to scale. A slow grand age. Note 2, grand means great, but notice the smiley face. Here, great or grand is positive, whereas in the beginning, it was negative. Okay, with perishing great darkness. Here, juxtaposed against a slow grand age. Okay? Now we have plenty. We are not in famine. We have home, comfort, security. Okay? Then we get that shift versus the opening lines. But now, for us, wild winter. Note 1, 2, 3 commas. 4 commas if you count that one. What happens when you read that last?
It speeds up. It's an increase.
But now, no, it doesn't. What do commas do?
Slow down.
It slows. But now, for us, wild winter. We are forced to slow down and consider the effects
It intensifies the juxtaposition
of,
the age of increase in wealth and now the destruction.
very good, okay? Wild winter, juxtaposition versus the previous calm of these three, of spring and summer and autumn. Now it's wild winter, I see. And we already talked about this, and the need of sowings for a new spring. Need new spring now and for the future. That's what that means. Here we've already talked about blood for seed. Okay, perhaps if you wanted to look at this in a, what might be the most positive light possible, even though it's not really positive, blood for seed. So maybe our sacrifice as soldiers, as a country, will be worth it if we are sacrificing ourselves to plant seeds for the future. There's a wee bit of hope there. Or you can read it completely opposite. Okay? That, even though all that sacrifice, if Christ sacrificed his blood for us, what are we doing with it?
Wasting it.
We're wasting it.
Shedding it.
Okay? And here too, I have here, obviously we've got seasons and the cycle of seasons, and this little thing right here, that means parallel, right? Yeah. Parallel. So the cycle of seasons parallel the cycle of war. And in order to progress, we need the blood of our enemy to be shed so that we can reap what we sow for a better future. Go.
I know it's juxtaposing what was and this age of prosperity versus the death that we have now. But maybe it could also, because all of those were civilizations that failed, maybe he's also mentioning them, because it's very distinct. Maybe he's mentioning them to say, these, it was grand for a while,
and then
they fell, and it's grand, and so maybe he's saying, this was grand, it's now falling, but there's going to be something new.
Good, I like that. And that does follow this.
Right.
Okay, the cycle of seasons, the cycle of civilizations, that's a good thing to add. Okay? How are we feeling?
So much better.
Like I wrote too much for this poem.
That's why we have other blank copies. Okay, I'm going to stop this now.